The night the mate bond formed, Elena Voss felt it before she understood it. She was standing at the edge of the Blackthorn Pack's moon ceremony, a guest with no real place among the shifters gathered there, when a sudden warmth spread through her chest. It felt like a string pulling tight, connecting her to someone across the crowd. She turned and found herself looking straight at Damian Cross, the Alpha King, and saw the same shock reflected in his eyes. Neither of them had asked for this. Bonds like this were rare, and rarer still between a shifter king and a human woman. But the pull was undeniable. Over the following weeks, Elena found herself drawn into his world, learning about pack law, pack customs, and the quiet weight Damian carried as a leader responsible for thousands of lives. She watched him work late into the night, saw him forget to eat, and began leaving small things on his desk, a cup of tea, a note, anything that might make his days a little easier. She never asked him to change his life for her. She only wanted to understand him. Damian, for his part, could not deny what he felt when she was near. The ache of the bond eased whenever she was in the room. He found himself listening for her footsteps in the hallway, catching himself smiling at something she said before he could stop himself. But underneath the warmth was a fear he could not shake. He was the Alpha King, and his pack was surrounded by growing threats from rogue packs pressing against their borders. The elders had already arranged a match for him, a union with Seraphine Duval, daughter of an allied territory, meant to secure protection through marriage. A human mate, bonded to him against every political plan the elders had built, was not something the council would easily accept. For 3 months, Damian said nothing. He let the bond exist quietly, hoping he could find some way to hold both his duty and his heart. But the pressure from the elders grew heavier each week. They spoke of broken alliances, of borders left undefended, of packs that had fallen because their leaders let personal feelings guide decisions meant for the good of many. Damian told himself he was strong enough to carry the weight of a crown and a bond both. He was wrong. The night he broke it, the full pack council had gathered to finalize the terms of his engagement to Seraphine. Elena was not meant to be there, but she came anyway, sensing something was wrong. She stood at the back of the hall and listened as Damian, his voice flat and formal, spoke the words that would end the bond between them. He said she was not fit to stand beside a king. He said the bond had been a mistake, a distraction from what truly mattered. He said it as though every word did not cost him something to speak. Elena felt the bond tear loose inside her chest, a pain sharper than anything she had known. She did not cry out. She did not argue or beg him to take it back in front of the entire council. She simply looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to see whether the man she loved was still somewhere behind his eyes. Then she turned and walked out of the hall without a single word. Damian told himself this was necessary. He told himself that in time the ache in his chest would fade, the way broken bonds were supposed to fade, and that duty would fill the space where the bond had been. He returned to his work. He continued preparations for the alliance with Seraphine. He tried not to notice the silence that had settled over his home, now that Elena's presence was gone from it. But the ache did not fade. If anything, it grew sharper with each day that passed. He stopped sleeping properly. He snapped at his beta over small mistakes that would never have bothered him before. He found himself standing outside the room that used to be hers, staring at the closed door, as though it might open on its own. He told no one how much it hurt. A king was not supposed to hurt over a bond he himself had broken. It was 2 weeks before he learned Elena had left the territory entirely. She had packed one bag, left her pack-issued phone behind on the kitchen counter, and disappeared before sunrise the morning after the ceremony. She had not told her friends in the pack where she was going. She had not asked anyone to come with her or to help her. The only thing she left behind was a letter, sealed with her name on the front, tucked beneath a worn journal she had used to study pack law. Damian found the letter by accident, buried under paperwork on a desk no one had touched since she left. He held it for a long time before opening it. Some part of him was afraid of what it might say. He had expected anger, perhaps blame, words that would confirm everything he already believed about the damage he had caused. He was not prepared for what he found instead. Elena had not written to accuse him. She wrote about small memories instead, the kind of things a person only notices when they truly care about someone. She remembered the one time he had laughed during a tense strategy meeting and immediately covered his mouth, as though laughter was something he was not permitted to enjoy. She wrote about the tea she left on his desk every morning, because she had noticed he skipped breakfast more often than not. She wrote about the law books she had been studying late into the night, not because anyone asked her to, but because she wanted to understand his world well enough to stand beside him as an equal, not as a burden he had to protect. She wrote that she understood why he had done what he did. She said she did not blame him for choosing his pack over a bond that threatened to complicate everything he had worked to build. She hoped Seraphine could give him the peace and stability his position required. And at the end, in careful handwriting that seemed to waver only slightly, she wrote the words that would not leave Damien's mind for the rest of that night, and every night after. I loved you before I understood what that thread between us meant. I hope you find something worth more than the throne. Damien sat with the letter until the candles in his study burned down to nothing. He read it again and again, searching for anger, for blame, for anything that might let him feel less like the man who had thrown away the best thing that had ever happened to him. He found none of that. He found only quiet forgiveness, and somehow that was harder to bear than any accusation could have been. By morning, he had made a decision. He called off the arrangement with Seraphine before the sun had fully risen, ignoring the calls from the council that followed almost immediately. The elders were furious. They spoke of broken promises, of borders left vulnerable, of a king who was choosing sentiment over the safety of his people. Damien listened to all of it, and then told them plainly that a kingdom built on a broken bond was not one worth protecting. He would find another way to secure the borders. He would not do it by abandoning the one person who had never asked him for anything. He gathered a small party, just his beta and 2 trusted warriors, and set out to find Elena before the new moon arrived. Pack law was clear on this point, though few alphas ever had reason to learn it well. A bond broken by rejection could still be restored, but only before the next full turn of the moon. After that, the connection would fade permanently, and no ceremony or apology could bring it back. Damien had little time, and even less certainty that Elena would want to see him at all. The search was not simple. Elena had been careful, moving through neutral territories where pack-tracking magic held little power. The trail led Damien and his small group through 3 different territories, each one requiring careful diplomacy to pass through without incident. In the second territory, they encountered a group connected to the very rogue faction the council had feared, the same threat that had driven the elders to arrange his marriage to Seraphine in the first place. Damien found himself negotiating passage, not as a king backed by an alliance, but as a man traveling with only a handful of companions and no political leverage at all. It forced him to prove, through his own actions rather than his title, that his intentions were honest. It was a strange kind of relief, being tested as a person rather than as a crown. He found Elena in a small border town 3 days before the new moon. She was working at a modest clinic there, helping the local healer with patients who had nowhere else to turn. She had cut her hair shorter. She looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. When she saw him standing in the doorway, she did not run, and she did not rush toward him either. She simply stood very still, as though testing whether he was real. She did not fall into his arms the way he had imagined during the long ride to find her. Instead, she asked him to sit, and she asked him to explain himself, not as the Alpha King defending a political decision, but as the man who had once let a laugh slip free during a meeting and quickly hidden it away. Damien found himself speaking more honestly than he ever had before, admitting that his fear had never truly been about the Alliance, or the Elders, or the Borders. His fear had been about losing control of a life he had spent years building carefully around duty alone. Loving her had felt like losing that control completely, and instead of facing that fear, he had chosen to end the bond before it could end him first. Elena listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment, studying his face as though weighing every word he had spoken against the ache she still carried from the night he broke the bond. Then she asked him one question. She asked whether he had come to find her because the new moon was approaching and the bond would be lost forever, or because he actually wanted her, apart from any deadline or law. Damien knelt in front of her then, in the small clinic doorway, with his beta and warriors watching from a respectful distance. He told her that he had read her letter more times than he could count, and that every time, it was not the deadline that moved him, but the honesty in her words, the forgiveness she had offered him, even when he did not deserve it. He asked her to come home, not as a mate restored through obligation, but as someone he was choosing freely, with or without the pull of any bond between them. Elena did not answer right away. She looked past him for a moment, toward the quiet street of the town that had given her shelter when she needed it most. Then she looked back at him and told him that she would come home, but not as someone waiting to be rescued. She would return as herself, with everything she had learned while she was away, and she expected to be treated as an equal partner in decisions that affected them both, not a secret kept from the council, until it became convenient to acknowledge her. Damien agreed without hesitation. The bond reformed between them that same evening, the warmth returning to his chest the moment she placed her hand in his. It was different this time, steadier, built not on sudden magic alone, but on choices they had both made with open eyes. The return to the pack was not entirely smooth. Some of the elders remained unhappy about the broken arrangement with Seraphine, and it took months of careful diplomacy to rebuild trust along the borders that had once depended on that alliance. Damien worked to restructure the treaty around trade and mutual defense instead of marriage, proving that loyalty between territories could be earned through consistent action, rather than forced through a wedding neither side truly wanted. Elena, meanwhile, finished the studies she had begun in secret, eventually working alongside the pack's legal advisors to review and revise old customs that no longer served the people they were meant to protect. One of the first changes she helped write into law was a clause addressing mate bonds, ensuring no alpha could dissolve one for political convenience without facing real consequences, a small but lasting change born from the pain she had once carried alone. Years later, those who remembered the night Damien broke the bond in front of the entire council also remembered the night he knelt in a small border town and chose her again, this time without any crown or council forcing his hand. It became a story told quietly among the pack, not as a tale of a king's mistake, but as a reminder that even the strongest leaders sometimes needed to lose everything before they understood what truly mattered.